Hello and welcome to In the Envelope, an awards interview podcast. I am your host, Jack Smart, awards editor at Backstage, the most trusted name in casting. I'm here to spotlight some of the most exciting film, television, and theater awards contenders working today. Who is in the running? What makes an awards-worthy performance? And what, dear listeners, are the secrets to giving one? We're sitting down for intimate, inspirational interviews with actors and artists to get that insider's perspective on these questions and more. It's an opportunity for some of today's most talented stars to share their craft and career advice, and maybe, just maybe, provide a tantalizing glimpse in the envelope.
Look, there are long, hard days in this job, no doubt.
Sure.
But it is a privilege to go and get paid, or even to work for free, making something with your friends, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's a privilege to go create and make things. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's a privilege.
This interview was textbook. This interview was so good. Jamie,
yes.
Hello. Oh my gosh. You are a voiceover actor.
I am.
What was it like to hear from one of the foremost working voiceover actors of his day? Time?
It was really great because he knows both sides, from the casting side and the direction side and the writing side, and of course the performing side. So it was a treat for me and all the voiceover people out there to hear that.
Yeah.
And of course his show Big Mouth. Yeah, it was really a lot of fun to hear that.
Yeah, that was one of those good shows. In terms of when you talk about it, you learn about kind of the evergreen advice-y stuff. Mm-hmm. I remember we got into it in terms of like how he sees quote-unquote dramatic material and how that differs from comedy.
Yeah.
The rules of improv and like creating a set that is either you have to stick entirely to the lines or not.
Yeah.
That yielded some really, really interesting stuff. This is yet another interview where we got a very clear picture of the person's process, I think.
I thought it was interesting. We was talking about remembering lines or not remembering lines and things like that.
How hard it is for him sometimes.
Yeah, which is why I'm thinking he probably veers toward voiceover because you don't have to be off book.
Okay, interesting. First of all, have you done any not on mic stuff? Like, have you done acting that has nothing to do with voiceover?
I did mocap and you can't be on.
Oh, right.
You have to be off book for that.
Okay.
Because
you have lines, but it's also it is a physical performance.
Yeah, and they're filming your face and your body.
Wow.
And you can't stand with a script.
Okay.
They're
That got you out of your comfort zone.
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Big time.
Cool. It's scarier.
It's good because you're freer. You're not necessarily. I mean, part of the skill of voiceover, not to make this all about me, part of the skill of voiceover is not to be so absolutely bound to like the punctuation and things quite so much. You say all the words in the right order, of course, but is separating your brain out from like it being written text into a performance, which is not quite the case when you're on camera. Of course, you're more living it as opposed to reproducing something.
Right. Is this true for auditions or demo reels, or is it more of you're talking about in the job of a voiceover gig?
Ideally, in all of the above, I think, really.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Unless it's super corporate. But yeah, I mean, it's a performance, even if you're doing a TV commercial, I think. But yeah, getting back to him, I definitely related to him talking about being off book and some directors or some writers insisting on every comma be honored. Which is restrictive, but then I suppose in some ways liberating.
Exactly. And he clarified that really well for me, like that sometimes a rigid structure is exactly where you excel as an artist, and sometimes it's the other way around where you want the freedom. And as he's the producer, writer, creator, all of it for Big Mouth, he has taken every experience that he's had before and created this set that enables his very talented voice actors to riff and to bring their own jokes if they want. They do read what's in the script, I believe, and then maybe they improvise. They don't have to. and it's a nice set. We talked a lot about the importance of being nice.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
Definitely.
And it's in who he is. He's a super nice guy. The negativity thing, this was true for MJ Rodriguez too. This idea of like, there's no room for negativity on a set, in an audition. There's no point. There's no point. It's unnecessary.
Well, I think people outside of the industry, the entertainment industry, kind of assume that it's just a big lark and everyone's just having a great time. It's hard work.
Yeah.
You talk to these actors and, they're getting to set at 5 a.m., 6 a.m. in the morning. They're not finishing until late at night. And, to have a bad attitude in that environment, it will not get you very far. People will not want to spend that.
It doesn't get you as far.
No.
Yeah.
So I can totally see why having a bad attitude will be very restrictive for your career.
Totally. And like so many of that lesson was delivered from Nick in this interview in a way that didn't feel like a lesson.
No.
In fact, that was what we talked about with Big Mouth too, of like, it's a spoonful of sugar thing of like, you do want to teach. A part of the point that season 2 of Big Mouth had this incredible episode about Planned Parenthood that was a bunch of different sketches. It has to be said, Big Mouth is absolutely the weirdest show on TV.
Yeah.
It is above and beyond the weirdest show. But the Planned Parenthood episode is supposed to teach.
Yeah.
But always with that show, and it sounds like with Nick Kroll's philosophy, you embed it in the comedy, and you do the thing of balancing between treacly sincerity and heartfelt and laugh out loud funny.
Yeah.
Goofy, dumb jokes, good jokes, cleverness, all of that. Every single moment of Big Mouth is a calibration of those two things.
So it's not preachy, but it is almost like a good teacher where a teacher will, use different vehicles
not
to
a
get
lecture.
not a lecture, exactly. And they utilize, various different techniques.
Totally. I think and then that comes back to this interview, because like, maybe in a transcript form, it would look like a lecture, kind of, because he really is he just made so many amazing points. This is one of those, like, you want building blocks of how to create a career as an artist. This is one of the interviews you listen to. Yeah. I was thrilled. This is really awesome.
Yeah.
I knew it'd be great, but he was amazing. This is really awesome.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about a couple of his films too, but if you haven't seen Big Mouth, it's on Netflix. It's awesome. Go see it. It is, again, the weirdest show on TV, truly, in the best way. Shall we listen?
I think so.
Let's do it. This podcast is brought to you by Backstage, the world's #1 casting platform. Listen, a lot of the guests on In the Envelope, an awards podcast, used Backstage at the beginning of their careers. It's how they are now in the running for Emmy, for Oscar, for Tony, etc. If you are at the beginning of your career as an artist, here's what you do. You go to backstage.com/subscribe and enter the code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free 30-day trial. That's right, free 30-day trial if you go to backstage.com/subscribe and enter the code ENVELOPE. All you got to do then is make a profile, upload a headshot, and start applying to jobs, to the thousands of casting notices that are uploaded every day, which you can filter online to match your specific talents, your specific needs, your specific looks. Get that dream started today. Check out that free 30-day trial, backstage.com/subscribe, enter the code ENVELOPE. Let's do it. Writer, producer, and actor on dramas and comedies alike, Nick Kroll is best known for his roles in some of the funniest projects of the last several years. He created The Kroll Show, starred on Broadway alongside John Mulaney in Oh Hello, and now produces and stars in the Netflix animated comedy Big Mouth, co-created with Andrew Goldberg, Mark Levin, and Jennifer Flackett, exploring the uncomfortable, hilarious process known as puberty. Ladies and gentlemen, the one and only Nick Kroll.
Yeah, when I first moved to New York, there wasn't really the internet, and so I mean, it was 2001, 2002, so I would look in Backstage magazine and look in the back and look at open calls and all that kind of stuff. I never really did much with those looking through it. Because
but it's good to know.
It's good to know, and I think at that point it was a conscious decision as to whether I was going to go try to be quote unquote an actor or be a comedian.
Okay.
And so I would look at those open calls or student films, auditions, or like, plays or things like that. And I just always felt like, I don't think that's going to be my way into all this. Like, I think I'd rather go do comedy, go do stand-up, go do improv, sketch, and use that hopefully as the foundation for being able to get like acting work.
Yeah, and that's because you were kind of following your gut instinct. Like, that was the way you wanted in.
Yeah, I'd studied improv in college, and with a group of people who I'm still friendly with and friends with and work with, and I went to Georgetown, and we had done some workshops at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, which was just getting going in New York. While we were in college, we'd come up and do like workshops once a year or stuff over the summer, and I'd go see shows over the summer at UCB. And then I moved to New York. I graduated college, and then I was living at home in Westchester. 9/11 happened. And so I delayed me moving in for a while, and I started... I basically started taking a class at UCB that fall right around 9/11, and then my New Year's resolution was to do like an open mic starting cool. 2002, and it took me like a few weeks, and then I moved into the city and just started kind of basically doing anything anywhere in whatever form I could to perform live, and at UC, took more class at UCB, joined a practice group there. My college improv group, which was like Mike Birbiglia and Brian Donovan and Ed Harrow and a bunch of guys I had gone to college with, had started a group in New York called Little Man, and they were performing at UCB, and I eventually joined them. And so I was either basically doing like an open mic, a practice group, or a show with Little Man, or what. And everything in between, as many nights a week as I could.
Improv, sketch, and stand-up, all of it.
Kind of all doing all of it.
For the purpose of that, like you wanted a liberal arts education in comedy in the real
guess
world.
So, yeah. I just think I was like, and still have never entirely been clear which was the one I'm best at or most drawn to, and I have found the most joy in sort of swimming in all of those little ponds.
Yeah. And that's the looking at the backstage things of like you are listening to your gut and saying what's going to bring them the most joy.
Correct.
Yeah.
And just like honestly, in my case, what's most bang for my buck? Like I didn't feel I felt like I'd done stand up, I'd done improv. I felt comfortable. I mean, I was very early in the process of like I want to be a comedian. Or I know I like comedy and I know I'm okay at it. I did not feel confident that I could go in and audition for a play or audition for a short film or student film and feel like I was going to book that. My friends who were doing that route, they seemed to it seemed really hard.
Oh.
I just seemed, it was my gut, and it was more, but it was really more, whether it's like, if you're able to separate gut instinct and like logic, I was like, no, I can go do an open mic and nobody can stop me from doing that, but I can go audition for 10 plays and not book any of them.
Yeah, and feel powerless.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the last thing I wanted to do early on, and still is to feel powerless in the process.
When did this all start? Because you studied improv in college, but did you get it in your head well before then? Was it always comedy? Was it always...
I did your average like couple school plays. I did one play in high school. It was like a temperance play, a one act. I was the villain.
Perfect.
And...
Did it open your eyes?
No, I mean, I had fun.
Yeah.
But it was not at my school. I went to a private school in Westchester called Rye Country Day, which is a good academic institution, but I did not feel as though it was encouraging my artistic. I had one teacher, one or two teachers, a guy named Carrie Fuller, who I thought who directed me in that play, who I liked. But it was not, to me, culturally a place that was encouraging performance and stuff like that. So I didn't think much about it at all. And then I went to a school for one semester my junior year of high school called the Mountain School up in Vermont.
Right.
And it was a real group. It was like 45 kids on a farm. And, we did a lot of outdoor activities, hiking, and environmental science, all that kind of stuff. And then we would get together on the weekends because there was nothing around. We would have like quote unquote coffee houses, and like my buddy Josh played blues guitar, and my buddy Sam could play drums, but he would play on like those little buckets or whatever.
Sure.
People would read poetry.
Cool.
And I was sort of like, I remember like lip syncing and dancing to like James Brown.
Oh, wow.
And that's when I was like, oh, I don't know what this is, but I like this.
Yeah.
I like, and it was the beginning of being like, trust your foot that if something seems fun and interesting to you, then maybe others will find it. And it doesn't have to be a play, and it doesn't have to be anything. It just could be like getting up and being on stage in front of people and really knowing I like that. And then got to college and saw some flyer for the funniest act on campus, which I entered. Birbiglia won that competition.
Oh, okay.
I bombed, but he saw me trying to do something and was like, I think that guy's funny. And then I auditioned. He put together a sketch show at the end of that year, which I auditioned for and got in. And I did the first read-through of the sketch show. And I remember walking home to my dorm and being like, oh, this is it. This is the thing that this feels like the thing that I want to do, and that and then, throughout college did a lot of performing in that way, and then moved to New York and started doing stuff. And then actually Mike recommended, I took an acting class. The one acting class I ever took, acting class, was Anthony Abeson, who I just sent Mike a picture of it the other day at the Producers Club on like 44th and between like 8th and 9th. It's just it's like a black box theater, but really Anthony taught classes there. I took like one acting class, tried to memorize lines to a Eugene O'Neill play. Could not memorize them.
Why is that?
I don't know. I hadn't learned how to do that yet.
Sure.
And it continues to be a problem for me.
Okay.
I didn't realize that I needed to. I think I learn lines verbally. I need to say them out loud to someone. And I will look
like a improv or sketch.
Yeah, or it's just like I can't sit in a room, look at my lines, and an hour. Like I could spend 3 hours staring at my lines, and I could spend 1 hour saying them out loud with someone, and I'll learn them in an hour much better. I had not learned that yet.
Sure. And it sounds like that's actually true for a lot of writers who act or actors who write, is that they, if you write it down, but you're also putting yourself in the character that you're writing or in the sketch itself, or if you're on your feet with other people. Yeah.
I need to put it on its feet to learn it. So I hadn't, but the class was good. There were some useful skills, but I actually felt like an acting class started to get me in my head.
Oh, okay.
Like process, like being like, you're sad in the scene, think about something sad from your life as a way in. I think there's great utility in that, but it was making me like, I was sort of like, and I'm still sort of like, or I could like read what I think this character's going through and then just like pretend to feel that way.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I do.
And I can just be like, oh, it seems like based on reading these lines that he seems sad, so I'll just pretend to be sad.
So we got you in here to elaborate on actorly secrets, and like there it is right there.
Yeah. Pretend to feel the emotion that the character you're portraying feels.
But I do want to get to that idea of like you called it acting. And I want to get to this moment in season 2 of Big Mouth where you did sort of speak as yourself.
Yeah.
And you had a moment of like, I might want to do some dramatic roles.
Yeah.
And like that felt like such a like, okay, what does Nick Kroll want? What is he telling his audience?
Yeah.
What is it about acting? You've been in at least two like very dramatic roles.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, I think
it sounds like you really separate.
Well, yes and no. I mean, in fact, I don't. I mean, I think people separate those kinds of things. The line is, there's a scene in Big Mouth where little Nick, 13-year-old Nick, goes to the future and eats an edible, he gets high and talks to 40-year-old Nick, who is a Nick Star, a game show host, who also has a show on Knitflax.
Oh, right.
about a cartoon about how he rocked as a kid. And Nick says, did you like it? And he's like, you don't mind it. You'd rather be doing more dramatic work. It's more of an ego thing. And I think it is. So obviously that's based in something. It's also a joke, but it's the idea being that I think a lot of comedians or comedic actors do comedy and weirdly are doing it so that eventually someone lets them go do a drama. And there's some weird thing of like, once I get big enough as a comic actor, I get to go do dramas.
Right. And either you stick your toe in and then you go back to comedy, or you're like transitioning to...
Yeah. And some people get to do both, but it's a weird thing that like we all kind of are like quietly aspiring to do. I've now been able to do... I was in this movie Loving a few years ago, and then in Operation Finale this year. Both historical dramas based in truth. Finale a little more of a thriller. And I love doing them both. And I think, and people are always like, when I was doing interviews for those things, they're like, "Now this is a real departure for you. This is a da-da-da." And it was like, well, it's a departure in that like someone allowed me to go do these things. But I would argue that on Big Mouth, and more so, like on Kroll Show, like it was a crazy, heightened sketch comedy world, and the characters were insane. But I would argue we were doing, in every scene I was in Kroll Show, I was acting to the height of my abilities. That there was no like selling out of an emotional moment. In fact, it was like, to me, my favorite, most exciting moments on that show were when we really dug in emotionally to these characters, whether it was like Bobby Bottle Service dealing with like, his love for Farley or his mother, or, crazy like Publicity, Caesar, dealing with Jenny as Liz, or all these things that were like so insane. But I was like, no, I'm doing nothing. I mean, I might be going bigger, but I'm as an actor, I'm digging in as much as I would be doing like a dramatic film.
Totally. I love hearing that. Like, it's not that different from O'Neill. You're making choices and you're committing to them.
Yes.
And that, like, it is. I like the idea too that it's other people who are making the distinction of like, well, this is serious and this is
correct.
And to your mind, it's all
the same.
Yeah.
It's all, I mean...
Same process.
And I think bringing what I have learned slowly doing dramatic work and realizing that it's not just as simple as like, whatever, pretending to, be sad. But those choices, the choices that you start to try to figure out how to make doing a dramatic piece where you have no flexibility on the words and the lines. Like, in comedy so often I have some leeway.
Yeah. Especially if it's your stuff.
Especially if it's my stuff. Right. It's like, well, I fucking wrote it, so if I want to change it, I'm going to change it.
Got it.
Whereas with dramatic stuff, if someone's written, I mean, sometimes I'm given leeway, but for the most part, it's like, this was written and this is and like you make your choices within the words that you're given.
And that can feel more constricting because you're used to the other thing.
Yeah, and then also weirdly more not freeing, but it's constricting in that way. But also being like, oh, wow, it's freeing to be like, no, I have to work with what is in front of me. How do I make good choices with what's in front of me? And taking that and bringing that back to the comedy side.
Oh, okay, cool.
So like my feeling, and whether it's doing a dramatic movie or a sketch comedy show or being in someone else's thing or writing my own thing or doing stand-up or doing improv or doing sketch, whatever it is, that I believe if I'm doing it right, I'm taking the skills that I've learned, I'm taking the things that I've learned in each of these other categories and bringing it to the one I'm doing, wherever I am. And that is, to me, like the great benefit for me as like what I would say like as an interdisciplinary performer.
Sure.
That those things, if you're paying enough attention, not if you, I'll say if I'm paying enough attention to what I'm doing, each one can inform the other. Okay.
But how exactly does the idea of being, these are the lines that I have to work with, and then you go back to the stuff that you're writing, is that partly because the writing process is such that you could polish and polish and polish, and like part of being a writer is knowing when to stop editing and fixing?
Yeah.
So is that one of the skills that you take over where you're like, what I have now is what we're working with.
Yeah, well, I think it's like for comedy for the last decade and plus has been so improv driven, which has been great and hugely helpful for my career. And but it sort of gave the implication that the words are totally disposable. And I think for sure we wrote jokes on Kroll Show that I love, but also it was kind of like any script could be thrown out the window to shoot to improvise to let Mulaney or Jenny Slate or John Daly or Jason Mantzoukas inform the part with their own words because they're fucking geniuses. But I think, especially in writing Big Mouth, we have a proper writer's room that we write scripts that we are trying to write so that the people coming in to voice those characters don't have to do anything but say the lines that were written for them. And then we say, if you have anything else that you'd like to say, or you have an idea, or you want to tweak this, they have more than enough. Of course, like you've got Maya Rudolph or Jesse Klein or all these amazingly funny, smart people who are writers in their own right. How could you not let them inform the part? But me knowing what it's like to be on the other side of that, which is like, and then you can just like make it funnier. It's like, no, you wrote this, like make this funny, and I'll say it, you know?
Yeah, gotcha.
And so I think we've tried to take some of that, like really like trying to write the absolute funniest thing we can write that works all on its own. That that the performer doesn't have to improvise or tweak it.
Right.
But again, also allowing them freedom to add, and which they do, but they're adding tweaks and moments versus having to improvise entire things.
Maya Rudolph is the perfect example because you can tell that she's been given these lines, but she's adding extra syllables.
Yes, she's adding. She's adding all the things that only she can bring.
Right.
But it's like, but we try to write as much to that, and then like we're also. Once we hear the fun syllables she's adding, we then try to write words that will be fun for her to say.
Totally. And that's what's fun about TV is you can keep going and developing the character.
And with an animated show especially, you write the script, you have a table read, we do a rewrite of that table read, we then record the show and actors can bring their elements to things. Then we have a radio play, which is just the audio cut of the episode, which we then listen to and do a rewrite off of that. And then
cool.
It gets animated to the animatic, like a rough draft stage. We watch that as a group, and then we rewrite that. And then that goes off to Korea for 4 or 5 months and comes back, and we see the full color screening of the episode, and then we do a rewrite based off that. And there's tons of stages to our show.
That's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah.
The idea of I like the idea of the writing for people and the thing of like you want to strike a balance between giving the actor enough to work with, like the idea of saying to an actor, any actor, feel free to improvise. Yeah. It kind of puts pressure on the actor. Like that's, I feel like a common scenario maybe in bad writing.
Yeah, I mean, it all just depends. Like the models, it just depends on the model. Like, like I was on The League, which came out of Curb, Your Enthusiasm, Jeff Schaffer, been at Curb, and like I think that model was like, you're all funny, we all write great jokes, here are some bits, but like say it however you want, feel free to improvise, and that was how that show was built, and it was super fun and gratifying to do, and so crazy, and I think like
crazy controlled.
Controlled craziness, yeah. And I mean, that's really what I think Kroll Show really was like controlled insanity. Cool. And I think, I don't know, it's like, I never mind being, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't mind being told, feel free to improvise. I mean, it adds pressure that it's like we didn't, I mean, they're all different versions of it. It's like, we've written a killer joke. Once you've said that once or twice, once we know we've got it, feel free to improvise.
Oh, okay.
Like, have an alt if you want, I also take it as, for me, there's a pressure release of being told, feel free to improvise, which means you don't have to be word perfect.
Okay.
And that, to me, is a huge thing, which is, there's a difference between being like, learn the words, but I know what it's like being, the other side of all this, I know what it's like being in a writer's room.
Yeah.
I know what it's like to write a script. I know that there are certain times where like some writer has like been up till like 3:30 in the morning and has been like, fine, here it is, like we're shooting this tomorrow. Right. I know that like that person hasn't crafted that for the last 2 years to be this perfect rhythm.
Right.
And so I feel like you have some it's not Eugene O'Neill.
I was going to say, yeah.
Like it's not something that's been tested for years and years and years.
Right.
That like, no, there is a rhythm, there is this thing that's happening here.
Right.
It's like, so when on the occasional job where I've been told be word perfect, I'm like, okay, but like now all I'm thinking about is getting these words right, and I'm losing the thread of what we're really doing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So in a perfect world, you're telling people like just try to get what we're saying here like largely right, and then I find people relax and get it all right, or at least that's how I am.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like once I'm less in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, I can do that monologue.
Yeah.
But if I'm like, ooh, I made that an it is versus an it's, you know, I haven't made.
And then you're like,
then I'm like, I gotta say it's, or I gotta say it is because that's how he wants it. Yeah. And there are writers and there are those projects that are like, no, be so goddamn precise because this is poetry.
Right.
And then there are other it's just project to project. You know?
Totally. Yeah. I really like the idea of you like sitting there. The in your head thing is very much a factor, and it's not something you can. I guess you just got to practice.
Yeah, it's just hours and hours of and there's no great, you know, like there's no substitute just for physically doing it over and over. Like the first couple commercials I did, you know, when I started doing comedy, and then the other classes I took were, I took a commercial acting class, auditioning class. Brooke Thomas and Mary Egan, who at the time were casting directors at House Productions in New York, that was a commercial casting house and commercial production company. And they taught a class, and they specifically taught a lot of the UCB people because they like to cast UCB people because UCB people could improvise.
There you go.
So what they taught me, the best lesson that they taught me was like, just be yourself, kind of, at least for commercial acting, they were like, fuck around with the words, improvise, make it your own. If they want you, they want you. And if they don't, they don't.
And is that, commercials are usually the kind of thing where it's not poetry.
It's not poetry.
Right?
And at least when I was doing them, it was like improvise in the audition so that we can take your best joke and use that and cast someone else.
Even if you don't get the job.
Yeah. So that happened a bit. But also, but honestly, for me, it happened so much more where I improvised in auditions and they were like, great, hire that guy.
Okay.
You know? And so I was...
Good.
That was for me... That was how I started... And I did it for radio. I mean, really, it was like started making my living for years doing commercials and radio voiceover work, and that made me I started to make a living that way, like so many actors, and I was like, oh, my way in is to you know, fuck around, and they were happy to have me fucking around.
And to be yourself, that's a kind of a crucial piece of advice too.
Yes, and that was it. It was like either they want you or they don't.
Right.
And be yourself. That's your best opportunity to book it. At least for me, it was. And I don't know. This was going somewhere. This started somewhere. Now I don't remember where it was.
What other classes did you take? You had an O'Neill class.
I took like a commercial acting class. I took this sort of real kind of, you know, standard quote unquote acting class.
And these were all the non-UCB things you were doing.
Yeah, and then I took UCB classes through like level 3. And then I'm trying to think if I've taken other classes.
And once you started the voiceover stuff, like that kept you afloat so that you could do the open mics, the
open mics,
stand-up.
Do stand-up at night, start making videos, making little, you know, making stuff myself with my friends.
Cool.
And then after a few years, we started getting paid to do some of that stuff. Like Comedy Central had this thing called Motherload, which was it was their first version, their first dip into like the digital space. Me and the Georgetown guys, Little Man, we did a thing called I Love the 30s. It was like a parody of all those I Love the 80s, all those VH1 shows. Called I Love the 30s. So it was people in the 40s talking about the 1930s, like the Lindbergh baby kidnapping and the Hindenburg disaster and that kind of stuff.
Like fondly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Babe Ruth. It was sort of like just how like everyone was like, you know, and I Love the 80s. It was like talking about Pac-Man, except we were talking about like we were talking about the Lindbergh baby kidnapping.
Okay.
And
really smart, like really almost historical.
Yeah. I guess so. So weird. And then I started doing like VH1, all those sort of like green screen VH1 shows. And I eventually got on Best Week Ever. And that was, you know, that was some money and also just more exposure and stuff like that. And then I went to LA. I think around 2006, 2007 pilot season.
Oh, okay.
And I auditioned for a bunch of stuff, and the last audition I had was, I think it was like last one was for Cavemen.
Yes.
The ABC show Cavemen, the hit show Cavemen, based on the Geico Cavemen commercials.
Yes.
I booked that.
So that must have been a major moment.
That was like, I had, you know, because I'd been in a bunch of commercials and I had been on VH1, but I had, to that point, not been on a TV show. I never acted on TV.
Right.
Beyond commercials. And there was something about getting that stamp of approval of like a network stamp of approval. Oh, you booked a network show. And then it went to series, and it was incredibly challenging.
Oh.
It was like 4 hours of makeup every morning to get in to become a caveman. And
that is tough, yeah.
It sucked. I mean, it was great to have an acting job.
Sure.
It was amazing. But it was just physically and emotionally taxing. We were working 85, 90-hour weeks. It was just, the pilot was, I think, we clocked in, the pilot was we did like 85 hours. And then we got to series, and it was just super hard, but amazing. And I just learned everything about being on a set. I learned like, you know,
that was your education there.
Yeah, it was just like, oh, okay, like this is how you pitch a writer to change a line. This is how you have to listen to the writer. You realize the director on TV is oftentimes honestly like working a bit for the writers.
Okay.
Like which camera is yours? Do I like you're stepping in someone's light? You have to hit your mark. How do you do an insert? You know, how do you listen to the sound guy when you don't have to listen to the sound guy who only cares about making sure your sound is fine but doesn't care about whether you're doing the line right?
The stuff you can't learn in a book.
The stuff you just can't learn in a book. Yeah, you have to learn on set. Like how to talk to, like how to, like it's so crazy, but it's like setting the table so that you can do your job effectively. Being like, oh, I want my coffee not right when I come in. I want my first cup of coffee like 10 minutes before I get called to set. So that when I get to set and I'm actually going to act, I now feel like as juiced as I can off that first cup of coffee.
After 4 hours of makeup.
After 4 hours of makeup.
Yeah.
But like I don't need a cup of coffee at the beginning of makeup because I'm just going to sit there for 4 hours. You know, again, it's like,
totally.
It's all these things that like can make you either sound like diva or a crazy person but really it's just like setting the table for yourself to go do to focus on all of these exterior things as little as possible.
Sure.
So that you can just then go and act.
Yeah, and be grounded and be present.
Yeah.
As present as you can be with the schedule and the cameras.
Yeah, be as like, yes. And you have to do everything for the first time at some point.
And
You know, and like you just like.
And those times are when you learn the most.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you're like, okay, that's what that was. Man, like, okay.
Even
and
if it wasn't perfect.
For sure. And then every job after that, you are just slowly learning there are things going to be different on every job, but you're sort of like, okay, I don't have to think about X, Y, and Z anymore. I can now just focus more and more on what my literal job of acting is.
And setting that table. And it sounds like, and listening to your gut is like an important part of that.
Yeah, sure.
What you like, what you don't like.
Yeah, and yeah, the kind of jobs you want. And I think, like, you know, we're all sort of programmed to be like, you know, and that's what's been interesting about, like, being in serious dramatic films, which I love doing, but, like, we're all kind of quietly programmed to, like, go get yourself in an Oscar movie. Go try to get in an Oscar movie.
Sure. Okay.
And then you, like, go do some version of that, and you're like, oh, okay, that's what this is. Is that what I want? Is that really what I want? Like, constantly asking yourself, is this actually what I want, or is this what I have in my head from when I was a kid or from when I started?
Yes.
And, like,
somebody else told me this.
Someone else told me, like, we have been told, like, go get yourself in an Oscar movie. And then you're like, well, that was fun, but maybe I really just want to be in, like, a fucking silly comedy, or I want to just go do stand-up, or I want to, like, or I want to go, you know, be on a soap opera because I like that life.
Yes.
Like, I think we're oftentimes not actually listening to ourselves about what we want to actually do versus, like, what we are told by ourselves or others as to, like, what it is that you're supposed to be doing.
That was primo advice. We are using that forever. Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask, too, is that it sounds like with the first network TV experience and onward, you must have also started getting experience about, like, how to build a set tonally, like how to make a trusting environment, how to get to the place where you can say to an actor, here's my solid script, but if you want to improvise and then have that good relationship.
Oh, there are definitely, every job I have had, there are things that I've taken and been like, that's how I want to run my set or my show. And there are things where I'm like, I will do this in opposition to how this is being done. Every job I've had. The biggest one for me, the biggest thing that is how every show that I've worked on for myself and the ones that I love working on the most is no assholes. Just no asshole policy.
Cool.
There's no need for actors to be assholes, and there's no need for other people to be assholes. There are there's people create unnecessary drama that just doesn't lead to good work. And maybe if you're like a once in a generational auteur, I guess you can be an asshole. But even then, I'm like, I don't know, man. I don't think you need to be an asshole. I don't think you need to fuck with people. I don't think I don't like when directors try to puppeteer things of being like, I'm setting this weird scenario because I think I'll get the most out of people. It's like, no, just tell me, like, I'm supposed to be sad in the scene? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me go be sad in the scene. That might just be me, like, that's how I work, that's whatever. Maybe some people need to be manipulated or coaxed. I don't believe it. I don't believe anyone has the right to be a diva. I don't believe actors have the right to be difficult. I don't believe that writers have the right to be difficult. I don't think directors have the right, and I don't think craft services people have the right to be difficult. I don't think the makeup person should be able to, like, have drama. I don't think that, like, nobody, we're all in this thing together. You're spending so many hours with people doing this incredibly silly thing. Nobody should be making other people's lives miserable or difficult. Nobody, like, we are privileged to get to go do this bizarre thing. And there's going to be trying times. There's going to be difficult things that go into it. There's going to be stressful moments that go into it. But nobody ever needs to treat someone badly to do that.
Right. It's the distinction of, like, it's when it's unnecessary. If you're Well, cruelty always is. Cruelty is always unnecessary. But the idea of, like, being difficult for the sake of being difficult or creating drama, it's like...
I don't understand it. I don't think it's necessary.
It's an ego thing.
It's very... I mean, it really is, like, how much is your ego running the show? And again, it's across the board. I mean, it's most obvious in the above-the-line actors, writers, directors. Those are the most blatant and obvious, but I think it's across the board. And honestly, it's just like, I think it just begins very simply. I mean, one, I think it begins at the top of the call sheet. And like I one of the first films I was in, I had a very small part in Date Night with Steve Carell and Tina Fey. Mm-hmm. I was in one scene. I watched how both of them acted on set.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, there's no room for anyone to be an asshole because neither of them are.
Yeah.
I just watched like Steve Carell stand there as they were like lighting. He had a stand-in, but he's just like, I'm just going to stand here, light me. I'm going to, and people talk to him. He was very nice to them. Mm-hmm. When his hair person came over, I learned a lesson watching him. When his hair and makeup came over, he would like spread his legs so that he was lower. So it was easier for them to work on him. Mm-hmm. And I just remember watching him and watching that and was like, oh, that's how you behave.
Yeah.
That's how you behave.
Yeah. And it really is the top of the call sheet that sets that tone.
And if the top of the call sheet behaves that way, nobody else has any leeway to behave anything but respectfully and professionally.
Because isn't it, at the end of the day, you're in the entertainment business. Like, this is all for the purpose of entertaining and, like, enabling audiences to have fun. And in theory, you're doing your work in a way that's, if not super fun, then not miserable.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what it comes down to.
Yeah. And look, there are long, hard days in this job, no doubt.
Sure.
But it is a privilege to go and get paid, or even to work for free, making something with your friends, whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's a privilege to go create and make things. It doesn't mean it's easy, but it's a privilege. And I think and it's so silly. And I think the more that you can be like, this is so silly that we're doing this thing, even if it's dramatic, and it's so fun, and the fact that we get paid to do this is such a privilege. And we should just enjoy it and you just are spending so much of your time with these people.
Oh, yeah.
You're spending so much more time with the people you're working on set with or in a writer's room than you are with your own family.
Right.
You better learn to enjoy each other.
Yeah.
Because, you're spending all of your time doing this thing. You, figure out a way to, enjoy it. Because it's so fun and silly.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like on a project like Big Mouth, it seems like I love the show so much. It seems like it's all rooted in joy. It's all coming from this place of I do want to know what inspired it and what on earth, why is this show about puberty? Mm-hmm. Why did you draw inspiration from your own life? It feels rooted in that, let's just have fun and create this own world that is ours with these, dolls that you can play with and have just crazy voices.
Yeah, yeah.
Was that the intent?
Yeah, I mean, the intent was my partners on the show, Andrew Goldberg, who I've known since first grade, and we really kind of formed each other's sensibilities when we were in middle school, and Mark Levin and Jen Flackett, who Andrew had worked with. He was their assistant when he first moved to L.A., was in grad school, their writer-director team. And they came to me with the idea for the show. These two boys, me and Andrew on some level, Nick and Andrew, very different places in puberty, very different places physically, but best friends and sort of navigating all of that stuff in very different places. So it started there.
It came from them, but from Andrew's telling them about your childhood?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I had become friendly with Mark and Jen. I'd been in Mexico City with them and their kids randomly, and I spent a lot of time with them, and we grew fond of each other. And I think, so they were they knew Andrew, and then they knew me, and they were like, oh, this feels interesting. So they brought that to me, and I was like, yep.
Yeah.
Show about puberty, show about these boys in very different places. Those ideas that feel immediately clear, you just it's follow that thing where it's there's nothing complicated about this.
It's pure.
It's puberty. Boom.
Yeah.
Got it. And then it's and then we all start talking, and they're like, well, the boys, but then they were sort of well, there's what if there's one of Andrew has Andrew was sort of describing this feeling of there feels there's this kind of hormone monster, and they were like, well, that's what it is. It's a hormone monster. And then Andrew called me and was like, we have this idea of maybe there's a hormone monster. And then I immediately was like, touch yourself, Andrew. And it just sort of came out, and it was got it, right, there you go. And so the show kind of unfolded like that.
Did the voice really come that quickly, and that informed the whole character?
Yeah.
Amazing.
It was that.
The line and the voice.
Yes. The line and the voice came out immediately.
Damn.
And again, it's that sort of trust the idea and trust instinct and it doesn't always happen. There's a lot of days that you are grinding it out. But like if you and there are moments of it when we're writing the show and on set when you're acting but like that version of a flow state where you're just if you are fully locked in with the people you're working with and you are locked in and you have removed the distractions of other things that things do flow out of you.
That's amazing.
If you're setting the table right. And it happens very rarely. But it was like whatever was happening that day or wherever I was creatively, Andrew said that and I said that and it was like
you're in that zone.
We're in it. We got it.
So cool.
And we then started to build the show out from those boys and then started to fill out like what kind of other, we had a very dear friend in middle school. It was a girl who was like dear friends with us, who was smarter than both of us. And we then were like, okay, it's this kind of girl. And it was like Jessie. And we realized like, let's bring in Jessie Klein, who I had worked with early open mic stand-up days in New York.
Sure.
And
she's amazing.
She's super funny and talented and has a great voice and has not done a ton of acting, but then you listen and watch the show.
Oh, yeah.
And like the work that she's doing as an actor in that show, especially as you watch it grow into season 2 and you see her dealing with depression and acting out and all that stuff, it's like, it's quite moving.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that was part of what we wanted to do with the show is that it's this crazy comedy with all these bananas characters that are silly, silly, silly. But underlying that, the stakes of puberty are so high that we were intent on being emotionally honest and not skirting and not running away from those elements of storytelling and comedic, and that the comedy can be informed and vice versa. That we were going to do something that was like at times like very sweet and heartfelt and I think both having the sweet and heartfelt allows us to get away with some seriously dirty, raunchy stuff. And in a weird way, the raunchy stuff, the dirty jokes and stuff undercut the sweetness so that it's never saccharine.
Right.
Or preachy.
Sure.
And that the lessons being taught are never at the expense of the comedy.
Yes.
And that we're not trying to teach
rule.
lessons, but that we are allowing things to be said that are very emotionally driven and trying to help kids get through a really tricky time in their life with models that we think are good models for how to handle a situation or figure out your sexuality or these really big important subjects.
Yeah.
But part of the way we can get away with teaching or not teaching, but part of the way we can get away with saying some really sort of heartfelt things is by having crazy bananas jokes.
And how, in those rewritings, how often are you approaching it from a thing of like too much saccharine, too much crazy raunchy?
Constantly. Okay. Constantly monitoring. Yeah. Constantly monitoring how not letting... Like, we are first and foremost a comedy. So it just has to be funny. If it's not funny, it's gone. But I think we are also very aware that there might be kids watching this and that whatever we're saying,
hope so.
And it's happening.
Yeah.
It's happening. I mean, I'd say like I know 11, 12. I mean, Andrew's basically said like his kids are younger, but like I'll let my kids watch it when they're the age of the kids going through it.
Yes.
So definitely. I won't tell parents what age is appropriate or inappropriate, but we definitely have 12-year-olds watching the show and we have 55-year-olds watching the show and everyone in between. Yeah. And that to me is like so gratifying.
Yeah.
And we're aware that there are lessons, not lessons. We are aware that there are messages there and we want to be on the right side of those messages. You know, we don't want to shame a kid for figuring out his sexual identity.
Yes. The shame, yes.
Yes, the shame wizard's a big part of the show.
Totally.
And so, and as far as like a writer's room and environment, like we've worked hard at creating and, you know, it started with our interviews with writers. As we interview writers, it's like Andrew and I are basically talking about it starts with Andrew and I having to be honest about what we dealt with at that age of puberty and still, You know, like I come straight from therapy the next day to the writer's room, and we'll talk about what I have been working through in therapy.
Wow.
And that creates, we've worked hard to create a safe environment where our writers then can be like, here's how I jerked off, or here's what when I got my period, this is what it was like, or this is what it's like for me now dating, or whatever it is that like create I mean, it sounds so cheesy, but a safe space to share that stuff, to get to the honest core of things and this crazy silliness of it all eventually through that.
Because a lot of that, society doesn't encourage us to talk about those things.
No.
It's a very sex-positive show. I think it's good for teenagers to watch it.
It is. We are trying to be as sex-positive as possible.
Yeah.
And I think that has been, you know, we're just kind of trying to navigate it and create an environment with our writers, first and foremost, to share their stories and for us to be able to share our stories, to create the most honest version of these things, and then figure out how to make those things funny.
And it sounds like your personal well to draw from, like that's one of the most important tools you have. The stuff in therapy, that's amazing.
Yeah, constantly. And it's crazy that there's stuff that I'm talking about in therapy at 40 that I all began or was stuff that I was dealing with when I was 13. That stuff is so foundational.
Oh, yeah.
And it doesn't leave us. And
treating that time period in our lives with respect. Like you said, it's high stakes.
Yes. But it's true. Treating that time with respect, treating it that what you were going through then is so incredibly important and formative for who you become, and to be respectful of that time. And to acknowledge it and learn from it, hopefully, and be like, okay, this is what I was going through at 13. I'm still dealing with that, or I'm not dealing with that because I've worked through it. And knowing that certain people are still working through that stuff. Yeah. And those kids for sure are.
Is it safe to say, too, that you're both doing the thing of, like, you want to put yourself in the shoes of a 12-year-old, and you want to write it from the perspective of an adult telling a 12-year-old what you wish you had heard?
Correct.
Kind of both of those, like, because so many... I mean, obviously, most TV shows or most projects are created by adults, but the ones that are about like high school and middle school, that's tough to get into that, like fundamentally into that, back into that perspective, into that like childlike perspective.
Yes.
And I think very few projects actually pull that off, but Big Mouth does.
Thank you. Yeah, we've it's a constant work in progress of figuring that out, but it is a little bit like, you know, what would I say now to that 13-year-old boy?
Yeah.
And it's like both in the show and in my real life.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to ask, like, why do you think it resonates? But we've totally answered that question, because it's like, I think that is why it's Big Mouth is a great example of in the specific is the universal.
Correct.
Because I'm not saying like
no, but I agree that in the specific is yes,
yeah. Like the Statue of Liberty episode is what I always come back to as like Jesse's having her period at the Statue of Liberty. That so resonated with me, and it was so the idea of like, I certainly have never had that. I've never had my period, but something about it felt very, very true and very, very specific. Like it had happened to someone.
Well, it happened to the girl who was our dear friend who Jesse was modeled after from the beginning, was like, oh, you're doing that show about puberty? She was like, I got to tell my story at the Statue of Liberty. And none of us, Andrew and I, who were dear friends with her.
You were there.
We were there. We didn't know because she had to go through that by herself.
Yeah.
And
it's brutal.
It's brutal, but I think you're right in that it's like none of us, as a man, I never got my period, and I didn't get my period at Statue of Liberty, but that feeling of something has happened to me, and I can't share it with my friends because I'm so embarrassed about it, and I feel alone. And that was a big thing for the show in general, was like, I think kids going through puberty, you feel so alone.
Yeah.
And I think what we were trying to do with the show, and specifically why I think while it's incredibly dirty, I actually encourage parents to let their kids watch it, is so that the kids just don't feel so alone. You feel so alone at that point in your life of being like, I don't know what's going on with me. I don't know who I can talk to. I can't talk to anybody about this. And just to feel like, no, you're not alone. You're not alone. Everybody goes through this. And that was part of it was like, oh, puberty. Everybody goes through puberty.
Yeah.
It's your customer base is very wide.
Yeah.
Your demographic is very wide because everybody's gone through it, even though it's this incredibly universal experience. However, then there are incredibly specific events that are happening to people.
Yeah.
But hopefully you can identify with all of it, you know?
Yeah, and that's why you got to unleash the inner, like you got to air out the skeletons in the closet or whatever.
Yeah.
I resonate with little Dick because I did not hit puberty until like 2 weeks ago. until I was a very late bloomer.
Yes.
And so there are parts of the show and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Did they ask me about my teenage years? Because
Yes.
this is like,
oh really?
Felt very, very specific.
Yeah.
The 2 little pubic hairs, that's too real.
I know. I named them.
And then you gave them amazing voices from amazing actors.
Yeah, we got Jack McBrayer and Craig Robinson.
Amazing show. Like, what other show could that happen in?
Yeah. No, it's like, I think it was partly starting with Nick and Andrew where you've got like a kid who's just ravaged by puberty and a kid who is desperate to hit it.
Yeah.
That you realize like nobody has it easy. Neither way is better. Neither, like, you've got a kid who can't stop jerking off, who's got acne, who's dealing with all this stuff, so awkward. It's hard. For the kid who's like, feels like he's not in the mix, that he feels inadequate, he feels less than.
They want what each other has.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you've got all the other kids and what everybody else is going through and like people's, and that so there's physically what happened to you, and then there's like people's families and home lives, and Jesse's parents going through divorce, or Jay being, not acknowledged and feeling like he's truly trying to raise himself and has no abilities to, doesn't have the tools to deal with what is happening to him at home or sexually or otherwise, and or like, Missy's just like supportive, loving parents, but she's like a horny spaz and doesn't quite understand what her desires are. All those, everybody's got things that they're going through, and everybody's got a backstory that is super real and tricky. And that's the beauty of continuing to do a show, is that the longer you do the show, the more real estate you have to cover all of these different people's stories and really delve into like what's going on in these kids' inner lives. And I think like, wonderful. You think back about your friends when you were a kid and what you were going through. You knew it was hard for you going through like, I want to have puberty, I don't have pubes, I feel small, I feel less than da-da-da. Let alone you're not entirely thinking about your friend whose like parents are going through divorce.
Sure.
And being like, what was going on in that house?
Yeah.
What is that like? Oh, is that why this kid was doing?
Talking about
you can't.
No.
Or I mean, maybe kids are better. I don't know. I don't know how different it is now with social media, whether kids can now find like-minded people out there going through similar things, or is it even harder that they have to like keep up appearances with, Instagram or Snapchat and being like everything's great, or like comparing themselves to others. All that's it's really hard.
Yeah. I mean, the shame wizard is forever. I think
the shame wizard is forever.
It's very real. Yeah.
And I think like you look around at some of the behavior of people now, and you're like, ooh, boy, like. Their hormone monster might still be present, but their shame wizard is really present.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. We have to wrap. This was amazing. What I love the idea of drawing from backstories too. Like, I want to ask what your number one piece of acting advice is, but I know it is along the lines of like, you have even said, I wrote it down, you felt powerless, and it was powerless and frightening, being at the whim of others.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just give us like this is why you're endorsing creating your own content.
Right.
Just like,
well, I feel like being an actor, I think when you're just an actor, someone has to choose you, and therefore you're just powerless. You have no control.
Sure.
And it makes it so hard because I think the longer that you don't have control, the more you are that reads on you. So like I think the more that you are creating your own stuff, finding groups of people to work with, and I'm not saying everyone has to become a writer and write their own scripts or whatever. But it's like finding a group of people that you work with. Like even if you just want to act and you want to like do workshops with your friends, that's like you're not waiting to be told you've got this part in this play, or you've been cast in this film, or you're on this TV show. That the more that you are creating a community of people to work with. And I do believe just about everyone can be a writer. I think every actor can be a writer.
Oh, cool.
I just don't believe like, I mean, I think you have to work at it.
Absolutely.
But it's like, if you're
easy.
smart enough to act, you're smart enough to write.
Oh, cool.
And I think like you started creating stuff for yourself. And then you're like, you've created something. You've got something that you can tell people to come and see, whether it's a play or you go make a short film. Like nobody has an excuse anymore. Your iPhone now is as good a quality camera as what we were shooting like digital shorts on and films with in the early 2000s. It's better.
Yeah.
Like what you have on your phone is better than what I was shooting films on in 2003. You have no excuse to go shoot something. I mean, Tangerine, they made that movie on an iPhone.
Yeah.
For no money.
Totally.
Everybody can, like, go show everybody what you can do. Don't wait for someone to cast you to show that you can act or be funny. And then if you go make stuff, then you have something to show people, but also you all of a sudden give off the vibe of like, I don't need this.
Yeah, okay.
Without having to say, I don't need this. You're just like, great, if you want to cast me in your film, great. If not, like I got something I'm gonna go work on.
Yeah.
Like I've got a short I'm making with my friends, or I've got an idea, I'm gonna go write my one-man show. I've got a film that I'm producing or that I'm developing. I'm making something with my friends. I don't give a shit whether you give me this part or not, because I'm not dependent on you selecting me or not.
Right.
It's just like, for me, it's that feeling of control that I think so many actors do not feel, that is so soul crushing.
Yeah, and it's the feeling of it. Like if you truly don't need the person's validation, that reads in an audition room, for example. Like you give off this vibe of like, I give a fuck, but I don't give a fuck.
It's like, like we were working on the season, Big Mouth, and I'm like, oh, I don't know, like I have that, like, because I immediately still go back to like, who wants me? Nobody wants me for an acting job. What's next? And I'm like, and then it's like, just go do the things that I'm just going to keep doing the things I do. And if the right thing comes along, the right people want to work with me, and I want to work with them, then I'll go do that.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the great luxury I have. But like I've set the table for myself so that I never have to wait for someone to select me to work and to feel creatively fulfilled.
Yes.
So just like whatever it is you're doing, whether it's like going and doing a podcast or going and like developing something with your friends or doing experimental theater in, Bushwick or whatever, like just go do the things you do and enjoy doing them. And find people and find a community that you like working with, and things will start to unfold through that.
Yeah. Wonderful. Beautiful.
Yep.
Nick, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
This is amazing.
Yeah, man.
That was primo advice.
I hope so.
In the Envelope, an awards podcast, is recorded at Lotus Productions, Hyperbolic Audio, and Big Yellow Duck in New York City, and Soundbox LA, Mark Grouse Studios, and Buzzies in Los Angeles. Like, rate, subscribe, tell your friends, and follow us on Twitter at In the Envelope. Thanks as always to producer, editor, and all-around podcast extraordinaire Jamie Muffett, and thank you to the team at Backstage, the most trusted name in casting. That's Peter Rappaport, Rawaan Alkhatib, Francis Ramos, Caitlin Watkins, Lauren Routt, Mark Stinson, and especially Kasey Howe. For more awards and industry coverage, head over to Backstage.com. Thank you for listening. Tune in next time for another glimpse in the Envelope.